Okay, good evening. Welcome to our Tuesday night hangout tonight with Energeon Publications. I'm going to be talking with Dr. Bob LaRochelle. He's the author of a number of books, and we're going to be talking about the place and the importance of your adolescents in your church. Let's invite the Lord to be with us. Lord, I thank you for your presence. I thank you for your spirit. I pray that you will be with us tonight. Let us hear and understand and receive what you have for us in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, Bob, let's start right in here because I'm not sure that everybody would understand what group of people we're trying to talk about.
Okay.
And so with that question, who are the adolescents and where do they fit into the church?
All right. Well, first of all, good evening, Henry, and good evening to everybody who's watching this. When I think of adolescents in our current context, I'm really thinking about people who would fall into middle school through high school age, middle school, junior high, so somewhere between 11 and young adulthood, end of high school, early years of college. I think the middle school through high school range, that encompasses a lot of years with a lot of developmental stages within those years. So there are variations. Clearly how one approaches a 7th, 8th grade kind of ministry as opposed to how one might approach ministry with juniors and seniors in high school would be different in terms of the context that they're presented with. But, you know, I would, in looking at adolescence, I would go with the broader definition, realizing that there are stages within that definition. Okay. Ultimately, if you go back to Erik Erikson, the guru of developmental psychology, you're looking at a period where people are trying to carve out identity as opposed to what he would call identity confusion. Okay, the task of that period is identity. So one would hope that somewhere in there, the question of religious identity is something that churches can help young people look at and explore.
Okay, so we've identified the people here, the adolescents in church. You're talking about developing identity, developing religious identity.
Right.
How much, before we get too far into this, how much of this identity development, especially the religious identity, is the church able to do apart from the home?
Great question.
Because it's going to be both, you're going to have the impact of wherever the child lives or the adolescent lives on that development versus the church's development. And I may follow up here looking at like different kinds of home situations and relationships to the church.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I do think that the primary religious educator of any child is the parent. Okay, and it's the home situation which has primary importance and long-term effect. However, one of the factors in adolescence is that kids in adolescent age tend to be open to influences from areas other than their parents. And this is where the church can be very effective. And I've seen many situations, many situations in various churches, and I've had, as you know, experience in different denominations and church contexts where kids are really involved in church communities, church youth groups, who happen to be from families where parents are not attending church or, are either neutral, not usually antithetical, but at least neutral toward religious practice. So I do think that churches can have a role in really effectively reaching out to all young people, including those who don't come from traditional religious upbringings.
Are you still hearing me?
I am, Henry. Are you still hearing me? I am.
Yeah, we had a momentary glitch in Well, we'll hope it's momentary glitch in the sound.
Do you want me to sum that up? Is there? I mean, I won't go through.
Just in case the same glitch, just the very end of what you were saying here, and then I'll bring in my next question, just in case the glitch was everywhere and not just for me hearing you.
Right, distilling all that I said, basically, I really believe that with adolescents, churches can be very effective, and I've seen churches being very effective in reaching out to young people and having young people get very, very involved in youth activities, youth ministry, who come from families where there isn't much in the way of religious practice. I think that's really one of the unique possibilities within adolescence.
Okay, let's talk for a minute about that. Really, I want to take it from one angle, which is to ask the question. I'm going to ask you both of these questions, or kind of point to both of the questions, and then try to answer them one at a time. The first point on this is to ask, what is the goal of how shall we say, developing a religious or spiritual identity as far as a parent is concerned for the child? And by what I mean by what is the goal, there'll be a certain number of parents who want to leave it fairly open so that their child can develop whatever identity that they prefer. In some cases, those parents might be these unchurched parents that are kind of neutral, but they give the child or young person the opportunity. On the other hand, you may have some people who simply don't believe in forcing their own religious beliefs on the child. So the question would be, when you talk about a religious or spiritual formation for a young person, what is the goal? And then on the other hand, where does the church work with young people and so on, where they do not have, in particular, the support of the family? And again, how might that change the church's goal? What are you trying to teach this young person? Does that come clear on the two sides there that I'm looking at?
I may, after I finish dealing with the first one, I may need a refresher on the second question. But yeah, okay. So if we're looking at the parent-child relationship in terms of faith formation, I think we have to look at different stages. I am going to presume that a parent is going to involve a child in Christian education because Christianity is important to that parent. So I think, in the earliest stages, a lot is exposure to the tradition, meaning scripture, to the stories, to worship, specifically to the Jesus story. Okay, I think that kind of exposure. Now, the reality with adolescents is you can expect and should expect some kind of questioning, even if the upbringing has been really rock solid. Okay, part of the nature, part of the developmental task of adolescence is to engage in some questioning. Okay, so that's where I think the church community and effective Christian education programs within church communities have to really embrace the value of questioning and have to help the young person kind of carve out her or his own religious identity, which may or may not be different from that of the parent and maybe different from the original intent of the parent, if that makes any sense. So is that fairly clear? I mean, I
that's
think
that's part of what I'm asking about. Of course, the problem is the question that I'm asking has a little bit of a relationship to the senior or the certification test for senior generalists, on which the first question is define the universe and give 3 examples. But and what I mean is that's when you're saying how am I going to raise my child from a spiritual point of view? And so I guess you have everybody from I really want to avoid directing my child into my spiritual background, versus the one that says I'm going to hammer everything into them. Now, I know, for example, you've written the books, What Protestants Need to Know About
Catholics, yeah.
Roman Catholics, what Roman Catholics need to know about.
Can you hear me?
And I grew up with something like that in a conservative church, where you memorize the texts that tell you what you're supposed to believe, and you have this. You go out spiritually exploring, standing on a foundation that is very, very well defined.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So we were breaking up here for a couple.
I probably made it even broader, haven't I?
No, I mean, no, we were breaking up. Our technology was breaking up here for a minute, so I may have missed some of what you were asking. But I'll try to, segue myself back into it. I think when a child is young, and Henry, if I'm not answering the question, please just stop me and redirect me. But I think that when a child is young, what's really important is exposure, okay? Not so much coercion, okay, but exposure. So if a child is being raised, for example, in a Lutheran church, which I'm pastoring right now, okay, I think what's appropriate is exposure to the liturgy, some of the core of what Lutheranism stands for, okay, certainly some of the teachings as expressed by Martin Luther, okay. I think one has to do this invitationally, non-coercively, that sort of thing, without conveying a message that this is the only way to go. But I think, being rooted in a tradition is an okay thing, okay. I think that when a child gets older, then questioning the tradition is a good thing, and that's a part of Christian education that I think is oftentimes avoided. And as you all know, because I'm writing this book for you, I'm doing a book on Christian faith for adolescents, and it's a book written for young people, for adolescents, not necessarily in their own language, because I'm 64. I'm not going to be speaking in their language as much as I might work with them. But it's a book which really is an attempt to get young people to look at some of the large religious questions from a universal perspective, so that even if they're raised as Roman Catholics, even if they're raised as Lutherans or Methodists or whatever, they're looking not so much through a denominational catechetical lens, but more so toward a broader lens. Okay. So, I do think that the process of faith formation obviously is going to take place in different stages, and the way that we approach this educationally and as parents has to take place in different ways along with those stages.
Okay, so probably for the other question, and hopefully, right. I know we're having some audio problems here, so folks be patient with us if we ever have to repeat. It's a good way to differentiate. If you're in the church, if you're the youth pastor and you're looking at a young person who comes in exploring on their own, they do not have a church background.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, and I mean, I'm acquainted with some for whom the reason that they're in the church is not that they're exploring religiously, but in religious terms, but that they simply want a place where, they have a sense of family.
Yeah.
Don't have it at home. But I'm talking more about the young person who comes in and says, my parents don't go to church, but I'm interested in what this is about, versus the one who has gone through catechism class and say is or confirmation class and either has been confirmed in the church. Do you have a distinction in how you approach the ministry to these two varieties?
Well, on a one-on-one level, in talking with each of those young people, I may approach some of that differently. I mean, to the person who's coming in who doesn't have much background and whose parents have not been involved, I really tend to be very excited about that for whatever reason, a young person is seeking out whatever it is that the church has to offer. In both cases, I think you want to tap into questions. I think to someone who's come through a more traditional educational background within the church, I want to encourage that person to continue to ask questions. Because one has accepted certain doctrines doesn't necessarily mean that one has plumbed the depths of those doctrines. Okay, so I think that the questioning aspect is an underlying foundation, and I think that really is part of what good adolescent growth is, to help people really get in touch with questions, and even to look at questions that they didn't even know were really questions, that some of the things that they may have seen as givens may not necessarily be so. Helping people see that, I think, is important.
Okay, let's kind of move forward here, because I'm certain that I could talk with you for the entire rest of our half hour about this topic and probably drive everybody nuts. Let's look at, I'm going to look at social media first, because for people like you and I who are definitely not of the social media generation, though we find ourselves touched by it for sure, that's not an easy thing. Involvement in social media, especially in whatever the current wave of social media is for the young people, what role does that have to play in your youth ministry?
Well, I think that anybody these days working in youth ministry has to really be conversant with social media. So I do think that obviously Facebook and Twitter are ways of getting the word out, not only about youth activities, but oftentimes getting out some inspirational things, engaging kids in conversation and all. I think, listening to young people and getting information from them as to what would be helpful in terms of use of social media within the context of your youth ministry is important as well. Okay, I think that people who are youth pastors have a lot to learn from youth about what media really is effective.
Okay, so you would definitely be encouraging the youth use of social media rather than trying to slow it down.
Oh, I would definitely encourage the use of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's great. I not only think it's a great tool, but I think it can be an effective means of proclaiming the gospel. I think it has a lot of real strengths. And as you well know, I also work as a counselor in a public school context, and I think anybody who works in any school, public or private, will be the first to tell you that media can be used dangerously too. I mean that a lot of the problems that are out there with young people with respect to bullying and harassment and everything are because of things that have appeared from other young people on social media. So I think churches are in a nice position, I think, where they can effectively use social media, but also help to educate people about the dangers of social media as well, or dangers of the misuse, not dangers of social media, but dangers of the misuse of social media.
Does your recommend that churches
I didn't hear that last part. I'm sorry.
Pardon?
I did not hear that last part.
Okay. See, because it looked to me like we had an audio issue there for a minute. Does your church have a social media policy that is a written policy on social media usage? And do you recommend such a thing?
I do recommend it. We don't have one yet. Okay. And it really, I do recommend it. And it's interesting that you asked that, because the use of social media is fairly new in our own congregation, and it's relatively limited. We have a Facebook page, which I administer, and we have a Twitter feed, which I administer as well. Also a website. We have just started going live with some events on our Facebook page. We have not gone terribly interactive in terms of posting questions for discussion, but that's something that I would like to do more of in the future. And I think that once you move to the point where you are posting questions for discussion, then you have to be aware of some of the ranting that can go on. That, you know, that's where you really have to have some policies in terms of controlling what is said, how things are expressed on social media. So
I think I've observed that to a large extent we do the same thing on social media as we do in real life, only it seems that we get it amplified. So however much trouble you can make through gossip in real life, you can make a lot more trouble with the same amount of gossip on social media.
that's for sure. That's for sure.
Okay, let's ask a question here. I'm going to be moving through. I have a lot of questions on my list here that I'm not going to get to ask you due to the time. And I do want to give you, just at the end, I would like to give you a few moments to tell people what your aim is with the book that you're writing, that will be released. I don't have the exact date actually, but of the release, but it's going to be late spring, something in that nature. So just be thinking about that. But before we get down to that, let's talk about material. What would you say that you look for in materials to use with adolescents? Do you have a standard kind of curriculum? Do you have criteria that you use? And could you give us any examples of materials that you do use or you do recommend?
Right. I'll be perfectly honest with you. One of the reasons that I wanted to explore some writing in terms of some materials for adolescents is that oftentimes I've been disappointed by what's out there on the market. Okay. I tend to recommend materials that are really respectful of young people's intelligence and challenge people's intelligence with some real hard information about the Bible, about theology, about the whole question of religious experience, okay, and are presented in ways that are stimulating and make sense in the life of the adolescent. So, I think there's some gaps out there in terms of youth ministry and youth Christian education publications. I really do. And what I am hopeful of is not that the book that I write is going to fill all the gaps, but it'll be a contribution toward something positive in the field. Among the materials that I have found, I like the Spark House materials. Spark House is a division of Augsburg, which is an ELCA publisher. I think they've done some good things for students of confirmation age, and I've used those materials and I like them. I think they're a good combination of some multimedia presentation and some good biblical background. I think they're solid theologically, but I do think that I think in some ways, I don't want to say churches have given up on adolescent Christian education, because that would be too sweeping a statement. But I think it's a field that has sort of been let go a little bit. I really believe that. That's been my experience.
Okay, let's continue here with something that's probably related. Is to what extent do you believe in tying religious education, spiritual formation, etc., to the cultural icons of the young people? On one hand, I think we would have a certain number of Christians who are, let's be against everything. Harry Potter, let's be against it. So you get a whole list of things, and we should be telling the young people to watch something more serious. On the other hand, we can tie this into what is engaging their imaginations. Where would you stand on that? And any basic ideas, realizing that we're looking at no more than about 3 or 4 minutes left.
Really? Yeah, no, I firmly believe in using the attractions of the current age, you know, the films of the current age, the reading material as source for discussion, source for exploration, because for whatever reason, those materials are filling certain needs. So I would want to explore with youth what needs those are fulfilling, kind of in a non-critical way, because I think you see some overlap. I think you see that some of the music, some of the media is fulfilling needs that in some way really kind of touch on spiritual needs. So I've always believed in embracing popular culture as a context for exploration as to what it does for people. But then I also don't want people who have been through any Christian education program that I've been involved in leading to look back on their experience as teenagers 20 years later when they're adults and say that all we did in youth group is talk about the movies of the day or the music of the day. I think that, connecting the questions with the larger biblical story is of extreme importance. So it's a balancing act. I think it can be done. I grew up in the 60s, where a lot of the Christian education at the time was very contemporary, but also was faddish to a certain extent, where a lot of traditional materials just kind of got thrown out. And, I feel that left some gaps for a lot of people in my generation.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we'd probably want to look at down the road sometime is just what we do about the problem of when the young people turn 18.
Yeah.
That might have something to do with how much we've addressed connecting their lives to the bigger Christian story.
Right.
The temporary to the permanent.
Sure.
But looking at the time, I think it's not the moment do that. I'm reminding people you're the author of several books from crossing the street about the experience.
Hey, Henry, I'm having a hard time hearing. We're breaking up right now.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I'm not sure how much it breaks up to other people as opposed to us.
Right, exactly.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you right now. Thanks.
People of books. I'll have to see how that comes out on the recorded version.
Right.
Crossing the Street. You're So Much Older Than, which was a collection of sermons, and some talk about how to preach and what Roman Catholics need to know about Protestants and what Protestants need to know about Roman Catholics we already mentioned. And you're working on the manuscript here for Adolescents. So with that, I'm going to give you a last word for tonight, and then we're going to call it an evening.
Okay. So you'd like me to talk a little bit about what I'm working on right now?
Just briefly, and then we're running short on time, but that'll be our conclusion.
Okay.
To tell us what you're working on.
Sure. I mean, the book that I'm writing on Christian faith in the adolescent just goes directly into some serious questions with young people. I ask them to explore. It gives them possibilities for discussion within their group, raises questions on what is religion, what are different religions, what are different religious approaches. It looks at the God question, the different ways that one can look at God. It moves into a discussion of prayer. You notice I've used the word different several times. That's kind of intentional, because part of what the work does is tries to open people's eyes to some possibilities that are out there. There are different ways that when one says God, one says I believe in God, what's really important is let's talk about the kind of God you believe in. And that's a quote that has been used many times by many different people. When you say you don't believe in God, tell me about the God that you don't believe in. That's kind of a popular quote that's out there that's been cited by different sources. But I think that's part of what I'm trying to do, to get young people to have an opportunity to be exposed to some of the great religious questions, and then to kind of help guide them toward formulating some of their own, at least tentative conclusions. I'm
Okay,
excited
well,
about it.
good. Well, I'm looking forward to working with you on it. Thanks for joining us tonight. I apologize to any of our viewers for audio difficulties, but we live with the way the servers run it. So for tonight, God bless you during the coming week, and we look forward to seeing you next week when I will be interviewing Dr. Alden Thompson, author of the newly released book, Inspiration, Hard Questions, Honest Answers.
Well,
So thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll
thank
see you
you.
next week.